So today, after a long chat with Joss on the phone, I've come out here and I've started bolting these rear guards to the car, to the body. I was a bit worried about doing this in case I got it wrong, but in the end it wasn't too bad. I did misdrill one hole, but that was easy enough to fix. So what I've actually done is, at the moment the guards are held with two bolts. There's one down the bottom here that actually goes through the skin, and I forgot that at that point of the body of the frame, this is an aluminium skin on a steel frame, and there's actually sheet steel on the other side of the frame right at that point. So that bolt is going through a sandwich of aluminium on the outside and then about a 16mm gap and then steel on the inside. So I can't bolt it up too tightly at the moment because it'll just crush the two sides. So what I'm going to do is I will drill out the hole on the inside and I'll slide in a little spacer tube, 16mm tall, probably made out of plastic so it doesn't rust or corrode, so that when you put that bolt through and clamp it up, it's not going to crush the two halves of the skin. It'll just pull them together onto that spacer. That's not a problem. The upper mount just goes straight through into the skin, into there. It's all just temporary bolts at the moment. It'll have nice bolts by the time I'm done. Also ignore this exhaust pipe. That's not going to go there when the car's done. I'm going to hide the exhaust under the bottom of the car, I think. But so the guards are on there now. One of the things I did is to make sure the guards are centered on the wheels. I made up this sort of thing out of sticks. With these building these pre-war cars, you tend to use sticks a lot, but the way this works is I have little blocks that go up on those verticals, but you can put that up against either side of the tyre and then put chalk lines down on the ground, and I mark the centre line of the tyre to make sure when I've got this all up on stands, I can mark the centre line of the guard with the centre line on the ground, which is the centre line of the tyre, to hopefully make sure that from the back, it's a bit hard to see with everything in the way, the guards are all completely straight. And I was also worrying about getting the heights of them the same. And Joss pointed out to me, as he often does, that the two guards are identical. So once I've drilled one side, I just set them side by side on the ground, checked they were identical, and they are within my handmade tolerances, and then just transferred the holes from this one that I did first into the other one, and then marked on the body the exact same position for the hole, the lower hole. I put that one through first on that side, because just with that one bolt through, you can lift the guard up and down to make sure the height's correct. And I just used the axle stands set at exactly the same height and made sure that's all identical. So the guards are now at the same height. They're both centered on the car, centered above the wheels. And next I was looking at how I was going to do the fillet piece to go in the middle here. And I thought that was going to be quite tricky to do, to actually get that shape correct. It turns out it's not so bad, because it's basically a flat piece of steel just with a curve in it in one direction. There's no compound curve in it. And I worked out the easiest way to do that in the end was with some builder's paper and more sticks, basically. As I say, you end up using sticks a lot when you're building these old cars. So these sticks just go across the bottom edges of the guard, and I made sure they're at 90 degrees to the guard. They're just clamped in place, and the building paper is just sort of clamped between the bottom of the guard and the top of those sticks. It's a little bit wobbly, but it got close enough. And then I was just able to slide the building paper in, which gives you the right curve. And to start with, you just trim the side roughly. So you don't try to get it to fit perfectly. It turns out it's almost a straight line. But you get it fitting close enough, and then I use a Sharpie on a block of wood to run the wood against the edge of the body to give me a line that runs parallel to the edge of the body on the builder's paper, and then you can cut that out. And then on the other side, this line here against the edge of the guard should be a straight line, because theoretically the edges of the guards are correct. So now I've got a template. I'm going to take that off and trim it. And when I make those fillet pieces, it's like I say, it's basically a flat piece of steel, and it'll have a flange on either side. It is going to be slightly higher up. So at the moment, of course, it's fitted to the bottom of the guard. It's actually going to be slightly higher up. So I may have to compensate just slightly for the fact that the body here isn't vertical. So if I move this up, this has to get slightly wider. I'll probably just assume that the angle on this is more or less the same all the way around, and just add on. I'll figure out once I raise this up how much I have to add on, and I'll add that onto my template before I cut out the steel. And this is just going to have flanges on either side, so it'll come across and bend down. It'll bolt hard to the guard, the edge of the guard here, and it'll be made from steel. And same on the other edge, there will just be a flange that turns down, and there'll be some bolts that hold it basically through the skin into the body. And there'll be a strip of rubber or that sort of fender stuff that goes in here just to separate the steel from the aluminium so you don't get corrosion. The other thing I need to do is figure out what shape I want at the bottom here. So it's going to be some kind of scalloped shape, I guess, rather than flat, although it could be. It could be straight or straight and curved down, or probably what I'll do is I'll cut my template and I'll cut this out, and then I can stick on other pieces of paper or other pieces of card with different shapes until I find the one that kind of looks right. So that should fare all that in quite nicely. Now the other thing Joss mentioned to me is about these guards. Last time I was complaining about all the hammering I'm going to have to do all the way along this weld seam on either side. And Joss pointed out to me, well, I didn't need that seam. If you look at this front guard has a little bit of curve there above the wheel, and a little bit of curve there where it kicks out at the bottom. The rest of this is straight. So instead of making that from 3 pieces, a top and 2 sides, I could have made that from 1 piece that was that sort of U shape. And then just welded that middle piece to the top and the bottom. And that would have saved me all this hammering. Would it have been quicker? Probably. I'm not sure. It just would have been a different way of making it, because when I started making these, the way I thought to do it was cut out the side profiles and then cut out the top and do it as 3 parts that way. So it's always interesting when Joss points these things out to me and I'm sitting there thinking, oh yeah, that's obvious, but obviously it's not obvious. This is the sort of thing you get with experience when you've built enough of these sort of things. But yeah, that's another way I could have done it. So that was a cool thing that he pointed out to me. Now, the other really helpful thing he suggested was, I was wondering last time about how I'm going to bolt the bottom of this guard to the car to keep it all stable and really solid. And I've always been thinking that these are separate pieces. But again, what Joss suggested, and this makes perfect sense, is, just put that a bit closer. The way I've done these ends is, this is wired all the way up and all the way around. Instead of doing that, what I should do, or should have done, or could do, and what I'm going to do, is I'll take the wire out of here, and you actually make this come up all the way to the rear guard here. And you have a flat piece on the end. So this is boxed in, this is closed in. And then you just bolt this to that. So this is already quite stable because it's bolted to the car. You just then bolt the bottom back end of this straight to there, and that takes care of the rear off the front guard. And you don't need any other supports or anything. So what I'm going to do is, I actually want to make this front guard fractionally longer anyway. about 2 inches longer, because this is all a bit awkward with one hand. Obviously it would be sitting a lot higher up, but you want the front of the guard to be in line with the front of the tire, and that's how I originally designed them. And it was only later that I started thinking, oh, I can push this all the way back into that rear guard. So I want to bring this forward about that far, which means at the back here, I need to fill in about that much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wire out of the back here. And the way you do that is with an angle grinder, and you grind that seam, the back of that wide edge, and then the wire will just pop out. And I'm going to trim this square, and then I'm going to make a short infill piece that will go in here, weld onto this, match this curve at the front of this rear guard, which is only very slight, and have that flat flange on it, so I can then bolt that basically onto there like that. And that'll keep that whole thing completely stable. It's going to lock everything together. Effectively makes it all one piece. And I think, as we've seen in one of the other films, this is easily strong enough to stand on. So that's basically what I was going to do next. The reason I started doing the fillet pieces is because at the moment this is the only car in the garage, and I need to keep it in this position so I could have these marks on the ground. So I want all that fixed while I make up these templates. But once I've got these made up, I can then move it, because I know then that for the guards to be in the correct position, the templates need to fit. So I think that's more or less where I'm at the moment. I may be able to film a little bit more later on, but for now that will do. I wasn't going to add anything about the making of these fillet pieces, just because I thought it wasn't that interesting. But it's been kind of interesting making them. I've done one, and I'm halfway through making the other. You can tell it's been a good day in the garage when basically all the toys are out. It's a bit of a mess. But I've done the first of these fillet pieces, which took me quite a while just to figure out how I was going to do it and to see what would work and actually do it. So this one, it's not bolted to the car yet, but it is bolted to the guard. So these are now attached. There's about 8 bolts, 3/16 with screws through there holding it together. And I am going to make holes in the flange on the bottom of this and bolt it to the aluminium, but I need the strip that goes between them. One thing I did notice, one small issue, is this is my steel tube frame, and of course that piece of frame happens to be exactly where the flange is that I need to bolt this on. So I'm hoping that bolts from there down will be enough to hold it, and I'm pretty sure they will be, because the front of the guard is attached to the body coming up to about there, so it'll just be this bit here that's unsupported, and it's going to have that rubber strip in there, so I think that'll work fine. But if we look at the one I've been making, it's a fairly simple piece of steel. So I used my paper templates and traced those onto some sheet steel and cut those out using my electric shears here, which make that sort of thing really easy. And then I marked the edge with my dividers, which will be somewhere in this pile of crap. There they are. So I always mark the panels after I've cut them out so I don't forget which way is up, especially on a panel like this where it isn't symmetrical. It's actually one side straight and one side's got a slight curve, but it would be really easy to get that mixed up when you're moving the panel around. So I marked it out and cut it from the top, which is why it's marked near side top. But then to get the break lines where I folded it, I turn it over and I use the dividers just to scratch my scribe line. And then to get a nice tight break here, I'm not good enough to do it just with a hammer and dolly. Some people are, but I'm not that experienced. So I cheat and I use my bead roller with this sort of homemade disc in it. It's just a piece of 3mm mild steel. And I just run that through it and it just puts a little kink in the panel. But then when you hammer up the fold, it'll follow that kink exactly. So that makes it really easy. I then just hammer and dolly it up. Usual sort of tap, tap, tap all the way along. At the rear, there is a wide edge. So there's a piece of that fencing wire in there just to round it off so it's not a sharp edge. And then at this point, it's all still flat. And then to get the curve, I've been doing what I thought I was going to do, which is use the shrinking jaws here. And you just sort of put that in there and shrink it along that edge. The reason the flange here at the end is bent 45 degrees is so that it doesn't interfere with the shrinker jaws. So it's back over here. So basically you do a few passes with the shrinker. I think it took about 3 to get most of the shape in. It doesn't take long at all. And then I had to do a little bit of tweaking, and this is what took me forever on the first panel, because it took me a while to realize what was going on. But because these two sides are different lengths, if you stretch them the same amount, because you try to do it evenly to get an even curve, if you shrink them the same amount, sorry, because they're uneven lengths, you end up putting a twist in the panel. It's hard to describe, but it ends up not being flat. So it took me a while to realize that's what was going on with the first panel. So I've been a lot more careful with this one. And basically what you do is you just put it flat on the bench like this and you just twist it by hand. So this is all just sheet metal. So you just bend it where it needs to go. And then what happens when you do that is you'll get a little pucker on the edge here somewhere where it goes wavy, and that just shows you that there's too much metal there. So you just shrink that bit of metal either with the hammer and dolly or on the shrinking machine. I didn't try to, well I did on the first one, I tried to fold it all the way to the end and I just found that it was too hard. So there will be a little piece sort of right at the front of the garden there where it's not actually got flanges either side, but once that rubber strip is in there, I don't think that's going to go anywhere. To make sure I've got the curve of this right, put that down without scratching the car. I basically got the curve by, I know how high up the guard it needs to sit, and I just sort of match the straight side with the shape of the guard, more or less like that. This needs a little bit of tweaking to get it right, but that's more or less correct. And then it's very difficult doing all this with one hand. That will basically go into there. So I just thought it was kind of interesting to show that doing it that way, shrinking it like that, does work. And because you shrink that, that just curves up. And it's really impressive how much it'll actually curve just by shrinking that flange. So I'll keep going with this and finish it off and then see what they look like.